Hello, and welcome to my channel. I am Damien Marie AtHope. In the simplest terms, I am an atheist-humanist philosopher and prehistorical writer-researcher at DamienMarieAtHope.com. I am specifically an axiological atheist. An axiological atheism can be thought to involve ethical and value theory reasoned and moral argument driven apatheism, agnosticism, atheism, antitheism, antireligionism, secularism, and humanism. Axiological atheists can be understood as a value theory or a value science atheist. As an axiological atheism's ethically reasoned and constructive pro-humanity. I am an axiological thinker, value theorist. The science of goodness, worthiness, usefulness, valuableness, virtue, reliableness, accuracy, validity, morality, integrity, beneficialness, etc., etc. We axiologists have a value consciousness. And in general, we see the architecture of humanistic humanitarianism value in people that we see as dignity beings. Places and things are not. Axiology is a value theory. In its broadest sense, it involves areas of philosophy that are deemed to encompass some evaluative or evaluation aspect. Therefore, it crosses almost all domains in some way or another. Now for a more detailed terms as to what I am. I am an axiological atheist, an anti-theist, an anti-religionist, secularist, humanist, rationalist, writer, artist, poet, philosopher, advocate, activist with schooling in psychology, sociology, as well as I am an autodidact, self-taught in science, archaeology, anthropology, and philosophy. I promote science and am against pseudoscience, pseudohistory, pseudomorality, things that are found in religion.
Yep. Hello.
There we go. Got it.
Anyway, so go ahead and tell us about yourself a little bit so people know. And feel free to say anything because we're leftists. So, I mean, we're like anarcho-communists. So, yeah. What I meant is don't afraid to be political, especially if it's anti-right. Yeah, that's all cool.
Yeah.
That's all good.
Yeah.
So do you want me to do that? Just dive into that whenever I'm ready kind of thing?
Yeah, whenever. But I would really quick just first say who you are and then promote your channel because I totally want to support what you're doing also. So I'm just saying, I'm just making a comment so that it gives people context because different kinds of people are going to watch this. Some people watch it because of my, political stuff. Some people watch because I talk about archaeology stuff and whatever. So just go ahead and say who you are.
Sure. So hi everybody. My name is Bill Farley, and I'm an associate professor of anthropology at Southern Connecticut State University, small little regional university in the United States. That's a public institution, serves mostly working class students and a lot of first generation students. So it's a great place to work, and I love working there. But it also gives me the freedom to do some weird stuff. So I'm an archaeologist by training and by trade. And my sort of day job archaeology is I work on early colonial sites in southern New England, especially in Connecticut, looking at interactions between Native Americans and European settlers in the 17th century, and pluralism in that setting, and trying to understand the impacts and effects of colonialism on different types of folks and such. But what most folks on the internet know me from is, what I think of my after hours job, which is doing sort of more public archaeology. I've gotten more interested in the last year or two in trying to reach out to a broader audience rather than just a purely academic one. And so in order to do that, I started a YouTube channel, which is called Archaeology Tube. It's right now still pretty small, a little over 3,000 subscribers.
I was going to stop real quick. I feel like everyone should check it out. I think that you're a great person. Well, from what I've seen, I mean, obviously, I don't. Well, you know what? Speaking of correcting myself, last video I had with an archaeologist, with Nick, John, one of the video I just did, I made a comment that I realized after hearing it again, I went, So what I said was that I had a speculation before an archaeologist had said it. I don't like how I said that. What I should say is, for a couple years, I had opinion that Göbekli Tepe had some relation to Skybarrow. I then later heard one archaeologist on a podcast say that the same thing. So my point is, I like accuracy, and I also am totally fine with making mistakes. I think this is one thing I said in a video before about Graham Hancock, is that when you make a mistake, a healthy thinker is proud to say, wow, I need to change, not attack the people that told you that you were wrong. Anyways, so
no, it's a conspiracy against me. What are you talking about?
It's true. And I, as a person, as a scientist, as a humanist, I don't know, whatever, as a person just trying to live as a good human, I recognize that I make mistakes a lot. I screw stuff up all the time, and I am wrong about things, or ignorant about things, or misinformed about things, or unaware of my own position in relation to things all the time. And I think one of the most beautiful things a human can do is admit when they've made a mistake, or maybe have made a mistake, and then try and learn from it and grow from it. I don't know. So I certainly try to do that all the time. And I've made mistakes, no doubt, in these last few months since I started getting involved in all of this. So I started that YouTube channel. I started the YouTube channel actually like a year ago, and was making videos sort of for me, interested in archaeology and its interaction with popular culture. But it started to grow a lot after we learned of our friend Graham Hancock, who I think we're going to probably talk about quite a lot today. And Graham started this show. And so I made a couple of quick videos that were just my initial thoughts, criticisms. The first one was asking Graham to do a couple of things. I hoped that asking, sort of calling on him to recognize the relationship of his work vis-a-vis racism and the history of white supremacy, and that whether or not he is personally a racist or a white supremacist is irrelevant to the fact that his work is used by people of that ideology to bolster their claims and to launder their ideas. And so basically was just saying, hey, can you call these people out, come out and say, listen, I'm just trying to ask questions. Whatever it is that Graham's trying to do in his show, but it's not for that reason. It's not to pretend that there are groups that are superior to others based on their skin color or their racial identity. That's ridiculous. That's wrong. That's heinous. And I disavow that. And people did not like that message.
Right. But which should be super easy to say. In fact, I'll say it now. Anyone who likes all my speculations and is a racist, you can fuck off. Right? Real simple. I mean, I don't use it. If you did, I'm really not liking you. So don't mean none of my ideas is I have some speculation, especially related to religion and how it moved through the environment with people. So that is, and even like I have a speculation, I'll just say it could be, and I want to show to me how I feel it's not like Graham Hancock. So I have a speculation that a lot of the stuff has to do with like shell mounds in general, kurgans, and even later to me, or similar kind of ideas, pyramids, ziggurats. They're all mountains where gods live on, or ancestors. That's it. That's my big, not that so my thinking is these religious ideas of mountains, sacredness and stuff relates to why they build. Anyways, if I am shown wrong, I will stop believing that immediately, because I think that's healthy. Just like to me, that I recently, which I wanted to address with you too, I felt skepticism because I had done all this research and it showed what I felt was the language moving with millet in the two major language groups in Asia. And then also some of that ends up in Turkey And so and in the Balkans, my speculation is, what if, because it looked like Millet went early and hit cultures exactly almost where some of the Proto-Indo-European comes out. So I thought maybe there's a connection. But then another study comes out and says, oh no, all that 7,000-year-old, evidence that I was, in a sense, making a reasonable jump from, I feel, is gone. Now it's actually only 3,500 or 4,000, whatever. So to me, I cannot any longer think that that's a connection. That's what I was saying about Graham. Once you have an idea and something, the facts are removed, to me, then the whole speculation should be removed. Whoa. Then that can't be.
Yeah, we've all had a lot of talks in the last few months, and it's been very interesting thinking about Graham. And he really doesn't like that term pseudo-archaeology, but it's a term that predates him, and it's been around forever. And it's I don't know, some of Graham's followers have tried to sort of act like it's like a slur or something, that it's equivalent to like a slur. And I don't know. It just is it describes a particular way of approaching data and hypothesis that is typical to guys like Graham Hancock, and that he works sort of backwards from the way most scientists do, and that he starts with a supposition. He starts with this is what I believe happened, and it comes from it's interesting that you mentioned faith and religion earlier. I think Graham Hancock is really speaking from a position of faith, right? That he believes there's a spiritual connection that he's teasing out, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? Exploring that idea. I know some of Hoopes's Dr. Hoopes's theorizing on this, has looked at this as well. That there's nothing inherently wrong with exploring your own spirituality vis-a-vis the ancient world. That can be healthy. That can be a great way to understand yourself and try and theorize about how religion emerged in us as a species. And yet, but he's got this. He wants to fit all the evidence to his ideas, which are spiritual in nature. And when the evidence doesn't fit, he says, well, that evidence is fake, obviously. And it's fake either because the methodologies don't work. You can't, for the radiocarbon dating was bad. The excavation was bad. It's whatever, right? He finds some methodological reason that it's wrong, or it's conspiratorial, right? Oh, actually the cabal of archaeologists, big archaeology, and those fat checks they send me every month is conspiring to hide the truth, or sometimes both. Sometimes they'll go with both. So it's like, your point being that, being open to new evidence and being skeptical of new evidence is good, right? Just because new evidence comes out doesn't mean that you have to totally abandon your hypothesis. You have to take that new evidence in and understand it and reckon with it. And sometimes new evidence will turn out didn't have great methodology or something. Sometimes there's even fraud, right? People do lie about data. That doesn't happen very often, but every once in a while it does. So you should be skeptical of new data for sure. But to pretend that the preponderance, the mountains of data that go against your theory aren't there or are fake is disingenuous.
Right. So you're correct. So that alone, even if that was it, I would still be iffy. Like I said, although what I was to clarify, my skepticism was not that something could debunk it. So it's not a Graham Hancock nonsense. Mm-hmm. It's that I understand archaeology to be, in a sense, the stratigraphy of the cultures. So when you have these cultures that are at 7,000 that are supposedly, and even to say some of the bones seem to be eating the stuff, and then later say, oh, all that's wrong, my mind's like, I'm going to believe science, but I'm having a problem grasping how, are you saying that the stratigraphy was wrong? Are you saying that someone somehow contaminated with higher level culture into the lower level? That sounds like sloppy archaeology. No, my point is, what is it? That's the skepticism, not that science changes. In fact, I've said before, one of the things that I, as a rationalist, love about science is that it will update to the new, most recent thing. That to me, that is like beautiful. I love that. It doesn't make me feel unsure. It makes me feel more confident. In fact, I was following one. I don't know if he's an archaeologist exactly. I'm not going to say who he is because I'm not trying to shame him. But he digs in the mud. Well, I'm not even making that a bad thing. If you understand, you could maybe know what I'm talking about. It's called something close to that, anyways. But I'm not gonna. say what it is because I'm not trying to shame him. But anyways, I was following him, but he said two things two things happened. So one archaeologist told me that I said that person who said that item cup he found was Roman was not Roman, pottery, and the guy blocked him. Now that behavior, that's a red flag for me. Whoa.
Yeah, I think I remember this instance making its way around Twitter. I remember the guy who shared the photo. I don't remember who it was, so I can't shame him either. But I do remember that exchange, and that is that's another way of denying the evidence, right? If you don't have the wherewithal, the confidence to accept criticism and even hear it, right? And some of these pseudoscience guys, one who I'm thinking of in particular, who maybe I also won't shame out loud, but who I've had some negative interactions with.
Andrew Collins?
No, this one's this is my buddy Jimmy. But
that bright side?
Yeah, the bright insides guy. He blocks everybody. Like as soon as you even don't even like just trying to have a friendly conversation with the guy, he'll block you if you disagree with him at all. He has there's no strength there in his reasoning if he feels like he can't even talk to somebody about. I mean, I've had some people just say some wild stuff to me in the last few months that I know is completely bull. But it's like, okay, all right, whatever. I'm happy to talk it through. Sometimes it's exhausting, and there's definitely people who are acting in bad faith, and they're just trying to wear you out and wear you down with bullshit. But most people are not. Most people are just asking reasonable questions, and they want to learn. And that's why I'm here, right? I'm an educator. I love to teach. And the whole point of going out into the public sphere like this was because I wanted to be able to speak to anybody. And if you're going to speak to everybody in the world, people are going to sometimes have some weird beliefs, or they're going to have some weird ideas, or they're going to think outside the box, or they're going to believe things that I know to be untrue because that's what people have told them their whole lives. It's not their fault, right? So trying to engage with folks like that can be a struggle. And then there's a different level of disingenuous people who are not trying to, true bad faith actors who do not have any interest in learning or talking or collaborating or thinking through. They've got an idea, and often they're trying to sell something, right? So a lot of times it will be guys that have a huge YouTube channel, and that YouTube channel is their income, right? They've got a million. If you got 1 million subscribers on YouTube, that's your job at that point, right? So some of those guys are, or Graham Hancock, right? That's his job, right? And he's a wealthy man. I can't believe how many people have talked, oh my God, have defended this guy like he is this downtrodden. He is a millionaire. He is a tens of millionaire. I don't know how much money he's actually got, but it's a lot. He's been selling books by the boatload for decades. He's got a Netflix show. That dude's got money. All right. He is not.
Why do you think that the public likes that so much compared to just real archaeology, which I personally think is absolutely amazing?
Most people seem to, right? If you go out there and you talk to people about real archaeology and you just show them the stuff, everybody thinks that's fascinating because it is. It's just like it speaks to us. It draws us in, right? Our shared history, our deep connection to each other and to the world and to the places where we live. It's a beautiful thing, and it inspires people. There's a reason why it's just so constantly inspiring. I don't know the answer to this. Why guys speaking to some of the folks who've been in this business for a long time, some of the archaeologists who've been trying to do this public art thing for decades. I've heard so many stories about how, oh yeah, I was working on, we were going to get a show going with such and such network, and it was going to just be like a straight archaeology show. And we got 2/3 of the way through, and some executives decided, is this about aliens? Is this about conspiracy theories? Is this about the Ark of the Covenant? We don't want it. Forget. Nobody will watch that. So there's some of it is that top-down thing. Like there is the folks who make the decisions in the world of media do not think that people are going to be interested enough in just straight archaeology. They think it's got to have like a conspiratorial hook. And I think you saw that with Hancock, obviously. But in new media, and I'm calling things new media, so thinking things like YouTube, TikTok, places like that, you do have I don't know, a handful of channels, archaeology channels that are good archaeology channels, and they just do straight archaeology. And some of those channels are huge, and they're making amazing work, and they've got 500,000 subscribers. I've chatted a lot with the guy who runs Ancient Architects.
I'm going to have him on a show one of these days.
He's an interesting character. And he might be a really interesting guy to talk to, because his channel
started, because I already talked to him a little bit. He said he started in conspiracies.
He did.
And he used to like Graham Hancock. See, me, I didn't really know anything about. In fact, like I said, I never read his books. I did watch his Netflix thing. Because last time I said I never read his book, which is true, and I never watched any other video with him, Joe Rogan, anything else. I only watched his not YouTube, his Netflix show, and I was like almost barfing in my mouth. Oh, this is
pretty bad. It's pretty bad. I've had to watch it now, obviously, too, for homework purposes, and it's pretty bad. But that guy, yeah, the Ancient Architects guy, he started out as like a conspiracy guy, and then, like we were just talking about, like you were just talking about, like he started to just learn more and read more and get exposed to new stuff. And he said, I was wrong about that stuff. And so I just decided he went and deleted a bunch of those old videos, started making stuff that was much more straightforward. And his viewership has continued to grow hugely. So it's not like he lost, I don't think he lost anybody. I think his channel has continued to grow a lot faster since, going straight, whatever we want to call it, and it's like, and he's got like 500,000 subscribers now.
Well, everybody has different opinions about what pseudoarchaeology is, obviously, because you can go to Wikipedia and different archaeologists say close to a similar thing. But to me, in a sense, pseudo anything is fake, and that's the biggest thing why I think it's justified and not a slur. What he's saying is fake.
Yeah,
it's not just. In other words, what I'm saying is it's not even an unreasoned speculation. It's literally fake.
Yeah.
It would be like saying if he said he found, the encampment of Sasquatch. Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, people would of course, unfortunately, too many people would buy that book.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, very popular, that stuff. Cryptids and stuff. Yeah.
Even though there's I've watched a couple of shows. I was just like, not only do these people say that they know it's real, they know it's movement in the environment, it's sleeping patterns, it's children. I'm thinking, you're insane. This is what? Come on. But I'm just saying. So to me, that's how I see it. Because I've had people even give me really bad speculations, and I told the guy having the bad speculation when he brought it to me, and I'll just tell it. I have a blog about it where he told me because. I like look at all kinds of old stuff and everything. So he goes, "Oh, I think a speculation that money came from leftover foreskin from circumcision." And I went, "Okay,
what?"
Okay, so, and I said, "Let me tell you why I don't agree." In a sense, okay, the money could have been rings or other items, but let's just say there is thing for shell rings, okay. In Samaria, I think I can't remember off the top of my head, 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. So yes, there is a little hole in it, and it's probably from a necklace, but it's a form of, in a sense, currency. And anyways, and I said, and he goes, "Oh, see," and I go, "Wrong. Even if they're Semitic later, Babylonians, they did not do circumcision. Most Semitics didn't. I know you didn't realize this, but you should look more about circumcision before you start making claims that it's a good speculation in relation to money." And so then I told him, and then worse than that, looks like if you look at circumcision behaviors, it's basically looks like it came from Africa into, in a sense, Israel and Saudi Arabia, and then that's it. There's other places in the world that do it, but I'm just saying, and it's still in Africa, it's a big deal, both male and female, and there's a whole thing about how the Africans feel like you're making the turning into a full man, removing the stuff, and then the woman turning into a full woman. But anyways, besides the point, all I was telling him is it has nothing to do with money. And let's just say, so we go to Africa. If this was true, you would have to say, well, then Egypt, who certainly did circumcision, would have been the ones to make that into money, but they don't. So I say it's ridiculous what you're saying. And then even worse than that is, the Hebrews didn't start doing circumcision until this time, but that's way after money. So it's absolutely a no on like almost every, to me, multiple reasons why it's falsified in a sense, or, it's proven wrong to me.
I suspect with a lot of these things, and I think maybe this is true with Hancock too and others, and any kind of theory like this is, people will take something that they think is true today, even if it is or isn't. Circumcision is associated with a particular group of people, and then it just sort of toss that back into antiquity and use that to flesh it out. And I don't know where this desire to feel like you've got it figured out, that you've got the answer to some question that nobody else knows the answer to. Maybe that's like a human thing. Maybe that's something we all share. We want to know that. And maybe we have to be trained not to want that, anymore, or to recognize that that's not really the point of science. Although we're taught that kind of it is, right? When we're learning about science in school or from television or something, it's like, oh, the great discoveries that's not really what science is about. Like, no, scientists don't think I need to learn some great truth that no one else knows. They're just trying to learn anything. And sometimes you get lucky and you find some great truth, and sometimes you don't. I'm splintering off in random directions here.
I feel like that's healthier to me. You're explaining. That's why I said I did like your channel and stuff, because you are, in a sense, to me, bridging more towards the general public, which I feel is seriously needed, because I think that's where these people like Graham Hancock can sneak their way in, because they sound like they know about our archaeology. Yeah. So, having someone, because just like if I told you that it was a biface tool, that in a sense, it comes from a full core. I haven't even said what I'm talking about, but you probably know, right?
Yeah. We're talking about stone tools,
lithics or whatever.
Yeah.
But everyone else be like going, what was it?
Yeah. So here's one of my takes on Hancock's show. Everything in Hancock's show has at least a kernel of truth in it, right? And this is how good pseudoscientists work. You find things where there's a kernel of truth. So one of the kernels of truth, and it is an absolutely reasonable criticism of science and scientists and archaeologists as much as any others, is that scientists are often not very good at communicating with anybody other than themselves. And we write these ridiculous articles that nobody's ever going to read, and they're full of jargon, and they're full of language that makes them explicitly hard. And some concepts are complex, and there is a place for talking about things at that level with a handful of other people in the world who know what the fuck you're talking about, right? Exactly. But that is, you can't just do that, because then what is the point? What is the point of gathering all this information and knowledge and data if we don't find a way to pass that knowledge on to others? And some knowledge maybe shouldn't be shared. I understand there's ethical reasons why there might be situations in which it's okay to defend certain knowledge or keep certain knowledge to certain groups. But most of the time, most knowledge, most of the stuff we learn in science should be shared as freely as we can. And you need to be able to communicate that. Now, we never get trained how to do that. Like, nobody ever trains us how to do that. I don't know. I've found that I'm pretty good at it. And that was long before I started doing this online stuff. I don't know why that is. I grew up in a family of teachers. Maybe that's why. Everybody I was ever related to were teachers, not college professors, but like K through 12 teachers. Right. And so I grew up around teachers. So maybe I just osmosed it from them, right? Like from everybody I grew up with whose job was to take complicated concepts and teach them to young people who don't necessarily have a background in that thing. But that is so vitally important. And that is a reasonable criticism. So there's a kernel of truth there. And then Hancock spins that out, and other conspiratorial thinking places do this, spin that out into something much more nefarious than it actually is. I would argue that the reason why scientists don't do a good job communicating with the public is either because a lot of them don't care to, or they're just really bad at it, or they don't really have an opportunity to. Like, we don't really get paid to do that. Like, that's not my job. I have to basically do this shit in my free. This is like I do this in my spare time, sort of. I can kind of convince my work that this sort of counts as work, but it's a little bit. It's tricky. It's not so straightforward as that, right? I feel it's a
good form of science communication. So
Yeah, that's what it's called in the business. But what that means is so open to interpretation. And if you try and convince, and no doubt in academia, if you try and convince the people who are doing your tenure review or something, oh yeah, I haven't published any papers in the last 10 years, but I'm a science communicator. They're going to look at you very askance, and they're going to want. So but I wouldn't call that nefarious. It's not, as Hancock implies and sometimes outright says, that we somehow don't want to share this information because we want to be the arbiters of all knowledge. We want to be the elite. We have hidden knowledge that we don't want to share with them. First, none of that even makes any sense. If any of us found Atlantis, or whatever Hancock thinks Atlantis is, some high Pleistocene ice age civilization, 15,000-year-old globe spanning civilization with advanced technology, if anybody sniffed a single artifact from a single archaeological site, oh my God, you would be buried beneath piles of grant funding, and your only fear would be that you would die of starvation from trying to spend all the money that the National Science Foundation would give you. Why would anyone hide that data? It makes no sense. It's silliness. And yet that's like half the show, right? Is him talking about that and pretending like this is a thing. And so much of the criticism that I've received in YouTube comments, on Twitter and places like that, has been at the core of that sort of conspiratorial thinking. And I had a comment on YouTube I know I'm hogging the conversation for a moment here, but I had a comment on YouTube
we're anarchists, so we don't really do a normal show, at least not in this show. This show is just kind of, I like just free flowing. Yeah. That's why, like I said, if someone wants to debate me, I don't debate, but I will let anyone come on here and they think they can challenge my ideas, and I'll listen. I always say I don't like debate because I want to go in with the ability to change.
Yeah. I don't know if later on we're going to have a conversation about the debate, the big debate that's going to come up later. I had a number of people sort of say, like, "Oh, are you going to put yourself in the hat for the big debate?" And I was like, "Absolutely not. I think debates are stupid." For the same reason, right? If debate implies it's like a battle, like you go in there with you're firm in your belief and you're trying to convince the audience that you're right. That's not the same thing as both sides trying to learn from each other or come to some understanding of the truth, right? Even if one side is more right than the other, and certainly I think that will be true if that debate happens on the Rogan show. But it's even so, I would hope that Flint will go into that conversation not to win, whatever the hell that means, but to inform and talk and communicate and what the heck are we talking about? Oh, I had a YouTube comment. What was that comment? Oh, I had a YouTube comment that the person had a bunch of criticisms of the things that I said in one of my videos, and actually they were reasonable criticisms. They were like about the facts, right? They were like, oh, what about this thing you didn't consider, or you didn't talk about, or what about this? And most of my responses to that would be like, well, it was like a 20-minute video. I can only say so much, right? And then at the bottom of it, they said, this guy talking about me seems much more open than all the other archaeologists, and that most of them are nothing like this. And I responded to that person, just to that part, and I said, listen, I have seen that exact comment under the videos and podcasts and threads and posts of many other archaeologists in the last month. Oh, this guy's not like any of the others. Is it possible that your idea that we all actually hate everybody and don't want to reveal any information or might just be not correct? You don't realize that somebody has told you that. In this case, Hancock has told you that's what archaeologists are like. Believe your eyes. Go on Twitter or YouTube or TikTok or any of these places, and you are going to find archaeologists with whole ass PhDs and fancy jobs, much fancier than mine, who are just willing to talk about it. And they might get defensive and they might get upset sometimes, and they might not always speak with perfect clarity, but they are not trying to hide anything. They're trying to find ways to communicate that. So the reality is that actually Hancock just made that shit up. I don't know what to tell you. He just made that up. It's not true.
Well, I feel like he, in the show too, he makes it, which is a fallacy, part of his argument. To me, it already, even if I didn't know any history facts, just philosophy alone, because I'm a rationalist, so I really care about philosophy and thinking. To me, just any idea, I don't even say it has to be for science to me, but any idea that's outside the norm holds the burden of proof.
That a lot of the conversation around Hancock's show has been around the idea of like consensus views and paradigms. These are complex things. Like, what is a paradigm in science or philosophy? What is it really? It's an era of time in which most people believe a thing, and then and paradigms go in and out of fashion, and they get criticized and replaced by new paradigms. And that's how we have to teach. Like I teach anthropological theory. That's one of the classes I teach, and it's really like a history of anthropological theory. And it's very much, we just talk about like the big paradigms of the science of anthropology and archaeology over the last couple hundred years. And
address one. So could you address one of them so that we all can understand who may not know the paradigms?
Like different. So I can give you
like, didn't it start in antiquarians, and then it became anthropologists, and after that, then broke off and split archaeologists and anthropologists, which is still under
for sure. I can give you like a super brief of like archaeology's three big paradigms in the 20th century, and and I'll prove my point in doing this. I think the point that I want to make, which is in archaeology, we sort of teach about the three big paradigms. The first one is culture history paradigm, and that kind of comes straight out of the antiquarians, and it's very influenced by Franz Boas and some of the early cultural anthropologists. And the culture historians were just interested in essentially just describing archaeological sites. They didn't have any radiocarbon dating or other kinds of absolute dating techniques, so they were just sort of like, that's where we get naming cultures after technology, so you get the painted pot people, or they basically were just saying culture is essentially like a set of artifacts that are often associated with each other. We call it the culture history, and it's very much a humanity. It's really closely linked to history and classics and languages and that sort of thing. That's kind of the
social science, right?
Yeah. Well, social science kind of comes later. It's really more at that phase. It's more closer to the other those sort of humanities. Social science actually comes out later, because then after culture history, we get in the mid 20th century the processualists. We're just doing some learning now. This is fun stuff. I think this stuff is fascinating. The processualists, led by a guy named Louis Binford, is one of the most famous archaeologists ever, were mathy sorts. They liked hard science. They liked numbers. They were driven by a couple of cool new inventions like radiocarbon dating. And in the 1960s and 70s, really pushed archaeology into more of like a bench science. So it was much more closely related to geology or chemistry or physics or something like that. And it was all about quantitative measures and statistics and stuff. And then in the 80s, processualism was criticized by the so-called post-processualists, who are really postmodernists or post-structuralists. And that's the social scientists, right? Then at that point, you see archaeology become much more closely aligned with like sociology and anthropology, and much more self-critical, and eventually heavily influenced by things like feminism and queer theory and
indigenous rights.
And absolutely. Indigenous archaeology emerges as really central, but also just a racially cognizant. I don't know, how do I want to sort of phrase that? Sort of fourth wave feminist approaches that recognize the influence of other identity factors like race. All that stuff starts coming in really strongly. Intersectional. I couldn't think of the word intersectional. That word just went out of my head. It was sort of intersectional approaches. All that stuff starts to sort of rumble around. So those are the three like paradigms, and they're very neat. They chunk out into like roughly 1/3 of the century each. It's very nice. The reality is, like, it was so much more complex than that. There were people of every stripe in all of those. There were weirdos during the processual era who were acting like post-processualists, and weirdos during the processual era who were acting like culture historians. And there are people today who are still very much processualists working in archaeology. That there's like, it's not like that disappeared. So the reality is all this stuff is much more complicated. I think Hancock likes to sort of flatten this and makes it seem like every archaeologist at any given time agrees about everything. And good God, that could not be less true. That is so silly. He likes to talk about the Clovis first theory, which was a, and I've talked about that in a couple of my videos.
So please talk about it. Because, I mean, don't assume that people on this channel, I mean, I know what it is, but please talk about it.
My biggest worry is that I'm talking too much, but if you guys just want me to keep talking about this stuff, I'll talk about it forever.
Just so you know, I didn't have you come on just because I care about Graham Hancock. I said this even to John in John's video, that I really like archaeology. So I actually really, to me personally, hate talking about Graham. I like to just talk about archaeology only.
We can talk about that too. We can get into that.
That guy, it's like, it was like someone says, hey, why don't we bring in the game Clue, Damien? So we could what? I mean, to me, it's that bizarre. Like, that doesn't even belong here. Like,
it's true. It's like the Hancock stuff has gotten all these conversations going, which is kind of a silver lining, maybe, right? If we want to say that, is that it has brought our attention back to the importance of public archaeology. And if we can use that to springboard to just talking about real stuff, that's all the better, right? It's all the better. So but the Clovis first theory, I can give you the lowdown on that too. That one I know more about than a lot of this other stuff, because I work in the Western Hemisphere, I work in North America, and that's really a big North American thing. It's a huge part of the history of North American archaeology. So, and
also please address the Younger Dryas. I don't exactly agree with it, but I want you to, I know Cory probably once again doesn't know what I've
no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, no, we can get into that too. And those are linked. They're sort of linked. Hancock wants you to believe they're really linked, like in a big way, and they're not really. But they're both important, and they're both essential to understanding what Hancock's talking about. And they both also have like interesting case studies about how science works and how paradigms work and stuff like that. And so they're valuable thinking about them from that perspective too. But the Clovis first hypothesis, which again, Hancock sort of drops like you're supposed to know what the hell that is. I don't know why anybody would. I never would have expected anybody would know what that meant, and except for the weirdos that I went to school with. I get confused that we're weirdos, but the Clovis first hypothesis was, as the name implies, a hypothesis. It was a theory and a body of evidence for trying to answer a question, a big question. And the big question in this case was, how did the first people get into the Western Hemisphere? So we know humans evolved in Africa and then spread out from Africa to the rest of the world. And seemingly one of the last places people get to is North and South America. You know, this is a huge portion of the world. It's separated from it's as far from Africa as you can kind of get, so it makes sense that it would be somewhere people would get later, right? Human populations. But how that happened was just it still is a huge question. And for like 50 years, a theory developed that was very neat. It was very elegant. And I think this is one of the reasons that it's stuck around for so long. And that theory was that around 12,000 years ago, you get a lot of stuff happens all at once. This is where I say where it's elegant. Like, it's elegant because it's like a dance, like a bunch of things had to sort of happen simultaneously. The first was that it was the end of the Ice Age. So the end of the period we call the Pleistocene and the beginning of the Holocene, which is, as you would expect, a period where it was getting warmer and wetter. So all of this all this water that was stuck up in these huge ice sheets that covered huge portions of the globe is melting. And because of that, the sea levels start to rise, kind of like they're doing right now. Right. But this is, a natural cause instead of an anthropogenic cause. But sea levels rise rapidly.
Human related cause.
Yeah, exactly. So the sea levels start to rise rapidly, quote unquote, rapidly. We've got to be careful with that word rapidly, because Hancock runs with this idea and implies that sea levels rose rapidly, like I don't know, like a 1990s tsunami apocalypse movie, right? Like a huge tsunami crush. And we're talking rapidly like a couple of millimeters a year, right? Which is rapid, but not rapid in the sense that like you could watch it happen, right? But within a relatively short period of time, a few thousand years, sea levels rose a lot. So a couple things happen here all at this like 15 to 12,000 year ago span. the sea levels are starting to rise, but they're still low enough that a big land bridge connecting North America and Asia, the Beringia, the Bering Land Bridge, is connecting it. You could walk straight from Russia into Alaska, just like what's her face said she wanted to do. What's the vice presidential? Anyway,
I also wrote in my blog that to Graham Hancock that his claim of the RB1, they would have walked over, so they didn't need boats. They wouldn't have been advanced boat. They come from the central Siberia and supposedly, and then they go across a land bridge and then to the center of the United States. I mean, your boat theory just sounds bizarre.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll get to the boats. Might have been involved at some point because it's gonna get complicated in a minute.
Right. For C1, R did not do that. R went straight to the Great Lakes, and then from there straight down to Mexico. So
yeah,
my point is how, at least what I should say, what I have seen from the data that I have viewed myself. Not that there could be some other data I don't know about. But from the data I've seen, that's what the DNA does. It does never on the coast. So to make a claim that that DNA was coastal is wrong. C1 does. I think it's A, B, and C, but C1, not later. There's another C that's called C3, or actually now it's called 2.75 or whatever, or 2.17, I think. But anyways, but that's later. That's within when the Nadane language kind of comes over from Siberia. But that has nothing to do with Hancock's theory, so that doesn't even matter in that sense. But so the ones that come over is that seem more coastal are. So that's why I was about fake. That's why I said just that alone, it's fake. You claim that the RB1 was the great coastal. They weren't. It's done. Okay, good. Let's move on.
Yeah, I don't know. The genetic evidence is so new, and it's like there's new stuff happening all the time that I haven't settled on what I think about it, because I'm like I'm just waiting for like some more news on this. So I think there's going to be so much information over the next like 5 or 10 years. It's probably going to continually force us to update what we think, which is good. Like we've been talking, it's kind of the theme of the day, right?
And I feel that, like I said, if you understand my thinking, as soon as I knew that, I would change. Done. I wouldn't have an argument if I did a change. So I'm not saying that it's unchangeable. I'm just saying from what we know now, that is a totally fake claim from the evidence we have now. You're right. In the future, maybe there's some new evidence, but that's not valid evidence. All the R that comes later is from colonialism. So, I mean, it's either the stuff that went straight to, it looks like, straight down the center, walked everywhere, didn't almost even use boats, except maybe the Great Lakes, canoes. But, I mean, other than that, I mean, it was just land, all the way down to South America, land. I mean, so to think that was coastal, it just seems totally fake.
I'm not sure because there's some evidence. Well, anyway, so let me where was I talking about? Oh, we're talking about Beringia, right?
Yeah,
because and one thing that like Beringia is really wide, right? It's like hundreds of miles across, so people would just walk right through. So that was the idea. But at the same time, as sea levels are rising, a thing called the ice-free corridor supposedly opens up in the middle of the two ice sheets that are closed that cover North America, like Canada, modern-day Canada. Those two ice sheets start to separate, and you get a corridor that allows people to walk down through the middle of what's modern-day Canada and then populate the rest of the Western Hemisphere. And all those things kind of had to happen in close proximity to each other for so 3 things: 1, the ice-free corridor; 2, Beringia; and 3, sites, the so-called Clovis culture sites, which are these archaeological sites that appear all over, especially North America, but even into South America. And they have these really distinctive projectile points, these spear points that have a big old flake up the middle, and they're made out of exotic materials, right? There's a lot to sort of the different aspects that make up a Clovis site. But these sites are really widespread. They show up all over the place. And that theory was it was the standard theory of peopling for like 50 years. And then suddenly not suddenly, in the 1980s and 90s, people started to present new evidence, new sites that appeared to be too old for that theory to like make sense. So you had sites that were maybe 13, 14, 15, 16, 17,000 years old, pushing back that timeline. And thus the whole Clovis first theory starts to collapse, because now we're saying, okay, yeah, that probably happened. The Clovis culture stuff happened, and Beringia certainly happened, but that there were already people living there in the Western Hemisphere when they got there. And these sites became known as pre-Clovis sites. And when those ideas were presented, there were a lot of scientists, a lot of archaeologists who were really wedded to the idea of Clovis first and didn't want to change their minds. But over the course of like a decade, minds changed. So that was a very firm theory. It would be like, I don't know, if a major theory of physics was challenged, one of Newton's laws was challenged. And at first, probably a lot of physicists would resist changing they'd say, we need a lot of evidence to prove this is true. But then if, study after study after study that came out that said, no, Newton's, whatever X law is just not correct because we didn't understand this aspect of it. Then eventually the physics community would change their mind. That's essentially what happened with this. The Clovis first theory was challenged again and again and now we've got sites that are quite old, at least in the 20s of thousands, 24, 25, 26,000.
The Bluefish Cave.
Yeah, we got that. And there's like the footprint site, which is in New Mexico. And then some sites that are much less well accepted that are even older. I'm going to make a video in a little while about the Cerruti Mastodon site, which is a site that has not been well accepted, but that would push back the timeline even further to like 100,000 plus. That's a whole nother conversation for another day. But that was, I think, a very normal growing pain sort of debate in the 90s, the slow acceptance of pre-Clovis sites. And Hancock spins this out into, number one, something larger than I think it was. It ended people's careers and it destroyed the scientists who were defending it were getting people fired because they were. I don't know where he gets that idea from. I don't think any of that happened. Like there were fierce arguments at the SAA bar, the Society for American Archaeology bar. I don't think that's the same thing as somebody getting fired. Like I don't think there's evidence that really happened. And the other thing that he wants us to believe is that debate is still happening today, which it's not really. Are there still can you find an archaeologist out there who doesn't believe in pre-Clovis sites? Yes, I know a couple, and they are rare. They are the slim minority nowadays. Most archaeologists have accepted that there are definitely sites older than Clovis. How people got there, when they got there, did they take some overland route earlier on? Did they have small boats that let them sort of like hop along the shoreline of Alaska and down the West Coast? Big debates about that stuff. But the very presence of people earlier than, say, 13,000 years ago is not really debated anymore in archaeology, or not in any serious way. So that was it.
Crossings. I was going to ask you, not that I agree. I think to me, it was the Beringia and then just along the coast in a sense, or some sea thing that has to do with Alaska. And so that's my speculation. But it's limited to that, I think. Mm-hmm. Except Polynesians, I think there might have been some interaction. I've seen DNA but way later, interaction with both, because something with Eastern Island DNA, I think, has shared from some DNA. I think it's from Colombia and from Austronesian together. So they don't know if Austronesians went and Colombian DNA came back, or if Colombians went and then Austronesians met them, or whatever. Anyways, my point is, I'm just saying that one I agree, just because of what I read. This is the DNA stuff. I don't agree with the in a sense that hypothesis that people from France come over. Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, that's called the
solution. On that, but I don't find that, especially to the DNA. I don't find it convincing. Now,
go ahead.
I was going to ask you though, but even though it's not my speculation, I just want to understand: is it possible that people went through the Arctic or followed in a sense over ice when there was no corridor? Is it possible to make it down?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different solutions, and I don't know the answer to this, and I don't know if anybody really does. But if you want to accept that there's earlier people there, the amount of time makes a big difference. Because if it's just a couple of thousand years before we thought versus 10,000 years versus 30,000 versus 50,000, all those can open up new solutions. Because of course there are earlier ice ages, so you could imagine people coming through Beringia, but in an earlier ice age, that would be a long time ago. I think the last one before that is like 60K. Oh, I don't want to say that without looking that up. That's information I'd have to look up, but it's a good chunk of time earlier. But certainly that's possible. The over ice theory that's most commonly talked about, that I think you mentioned from France, is the Solutrean hypothesis.
Yeah, I don't
this idea. Yeah, this idea that a group from Europe came across the ice. And this was largely based on two things that I think are really facile, which is a fun way of saying that they're just like not very good evidence, right? One is a similarity between a projectile point type. So there's a spear point in France called the Solutrean point that kind of, if you squint, looks like a Clovis point. But all spear points, have a certain kind of shape, that's a functional sort of shape. It doesn't have the flute, which is that flake up the middle. That's like the distinctive thing of Clovis. So it's hard for me to say that there's a strong connection there without that flute. But anyway, I'm not a lithicist, so I'm not a stone tools guy. So I don't want to speak too authoritatively on that. So, but that was one thing, was this similarity between these two projectile points. And then the other one was that there was supposedly a preponderance of Clovis and pre-Clovis sites on the East Coast. And so Meadowcroft Rock Shelter, which is near Pittsburgh, was one of the earliest really debated pre-Clovis sites. It's not that early compared to some of the other pre-Clovis sites. It's like 14,500 years old, but it's one of the sites that was first really strongly debated and eventually sort of accepted by archaeologists. And that's near the East Coast, kind of. Pittsburgh is pretty far inland, to be totally honest, Western Pennsylvania. But there's also a lot of Clovis sites up and down the East Coast. So the thinking was, well, a lot of these Clovis sites are on the East Coast. I actually think that's sampling bias. So what, on a grand scale, by which I mean there has been a lot more, like orders of magnitude more archaeology done on the East Coast than there has been anywhere else in the country, because it's the most developed part of the country, right? It's where most of the big cities are. It's where the big highway systems are. And so every time a big one of these kinds of projects is done, archaeology has to be done. That's where most of the universities are. So a lot of archaeologists like to work close to home. I don't even say that.
I don't blame them.
Yeah, I don't even say that as a diss, because that's true of me. I do community archaeology. I do my archaeology in my own backyard. That's what we do. I work in Connecticut. And so I think the reason we have more Clovis sites is because there's Clovis sites everywhere in North America, everywhere. And we find them anywhere we look hard enough. And so the East Coast has had a lot more archaeological survey done. We have more Clovis sites. I think that's the reason why. That's my suspicion. So, and you're right. The other one is the DNA evidence has just not supported the Solutrean hypothesis. No. Again and again, it's shown that the populations that have the least genetic affinity similarity is Europeans and Native Americans. Like they're the furthest separated, or one of the furthest separated, and you see much more genetic similarities between Native Americans and people in Asia, which makes sense, right, for a west to east sort of a trajectory. So this is fun stuff. This is all stuff we again, it's amazing that this stuff is relevant. Like people are talking about this stuff. Yeah. This is such like nerdy inside baseball stuff. And suddenly people are really interested in it because, it's on this show and it's supposedly the bedrock of information for these wild theories. So I don't know.
but I think you're helping to highlight that the real archaeology is also amazing. So I really find it to be just like you said, maybe what you said was the point. They want the best on a show for TV that'll shock people. They don't really care. And I actually had people contact me to put me on, because I talk a lot about archaeology and I see speculations and they're like, oh, great. Maybe he's got all kinds of conspiracies. I don't have any.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. It's and even when you
so
see,
they actually did a video with me and talked to me, and then they go, okay, I want to understand. You agree with pretty much everything that archaeology says, and I go, yes.
you're the ones bringing the evidence.
I mean, not 100%, but yeah, pretty. Well, I'm like, yeah, that's why I also say all the time. Even though I make lots of speculations and I feel like I'm a smart guy, I would know nothing if it wasn't for the hard work of the archaeologists, anthropologists, ethnographers, the linguists, the DNA, scientists. All that stuff is where pottery shards and zoology, zooarchaeology, and that's how I learned. So, yeah.
And that's true of Graham too, right? This is when I get snippier, and I try not to get snippy because I know that can shut down discussions. But when I feel snippier, that's where oftentimes I want to go with some of the people who are not fans of Hancock just because they think the show's interesting or they think it's fun or whatever, right? There's a lot, like we talked before. Most people are good faith and they're getting interested in this stuff however they do. And Hancock stuff is everywhere, right? It's in the popular awareness. But the people who are not arguing in bad faith and their first defense will be, well, Hancock is not an archaeologist. He's a journalist. And first of all, journalists are supposed to tell the truth. That's kind of like the bedrock of the whole discipline. And like, sure, sometimes they don't, but that's what they're supposed to do.
Both sides, even-handedly. That would be a great thing.
Sure, that would be better than whatever Hancock's doing, I guess. But they also, everything Hancock presents on, all of that evidence, he has gotten from archaeologists. He didn't produce any of that information. Right. All of it is stuff he learned from reading reports from archaeologists and work from archaeologists. And whatever, we're just like anybody else. I'm not saying like we should get a high five for that, but it's like the dude is going to, in one breath, talk about how we're the worst people in the world. We're all liars. We're all trying to hide the truth, and we're all conspiratorial and stuff. And then the next breath, he's showing all this amazing information about this incredible site. And it's like, dude, I know the paper you read to learn that, and there's nothing conspiratorial in it. Like, I've met that guy. He's nice. I've met her. I've met her. She's brilliant. You should just talk to her and she'll tell you about the site, man. She's worked there for 20 years. It's like there's a kind of a, I don't know. There's an irony there, I guess, and it's frustrating. And so again, I try to avoid that level of snippiness, but that's where in my snippy heart, I sometimes find myself is like, come on, man.
but I feel that that's actually not unreasonable. Seriously. I mean, just anybody that thinks that somehow this person who's saying this stuff is got more accuracy than the people that are doing the archaeology, I would be skeptical of that. And you would have to, once again, like you said about before, I think he just said it about, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. I agree with that. So, and I also, like I said, is anyone to me that when they're challenged of their idea gets defensive, I'm already doubting that behavior. That doesn't sound healthy.
No, and it's not. And you have to fight that urge, right? And as a scientist, and everybody's a scientist. Like, I don't want to pretend like you need to have some degree or whatever to be a scientist. We all are scientists to some extent, right? We all think that way, and we all there are other ways to experience the world and think. It's not the only way to approach the world. That shouldn't be, but we all do think that way sometimes, right? We all are collecting evidence and coming up with theories and testing those theories just in our everyday life, and the way that we bring information in and try and decide what we believe and what we don't believe. All of us are scientists, and that is an urge that we need to fight as scientists. Is this idea that any challenge to what you already believe is something you have to get defensive about. It might be that the person who is challenging you is not right, and you might be right. You're like, sometimes you don't always have to change your opinion just because you hear the evidence, but you've got to listen and hear what they're saying, and then bring that new information into your existing worldview, and then you're going to have a new worldview one way or the other. It might be that the things you already believed are actually strengthened because now you've heard new evidence, and you go, you know what? I think that actually is so wrong then I'm even more right. I don't know, like whatever, right? But it's like, that's healthy. That's how you actually bring in that information and come to some closer notion of truth. And I like that I think that was in your blog. You mentioned that like scientists are weary of talking about truth and facts because we know that there's no such thing as like one perfect truth, right? Truth itself.
Well, I think that I'm going to clarify. I'm a rationalist, so I'm not a skeptic. And that means I know people don't quite grasp the gravity of what that means.
I'm not sure I do, so I'm interested.
So how I approach things is about I build things from reason. In a sense, I start with no beliefs or try to with nothing. Like you said about starting with the speculation and then building the fact. What the heck? No, you start with nothing. Look at all the facts. Then you start to go, is there anything going on? If not, then keep going. But then when you find something, how can you then look at are all the pieces making some kind of thing? Then from that, to me, you should start making the speculation. So I agree. But so I'm saying is that all these things are built up to me. And to me, all claims, whether it's truth, fact, evidence, all these are value judgments to me. Mm-hmm. In other words, they're labels, they're terms we are putting on things. So I feel that in a sense, science takes too much skepticism when it says we don't do truth. Well, when you say a fact is a thing that is true. Could you imagine an untrue fact? But I think the problem is, what I want to clarify is, I think that science should grasp that they have to explain that they do different kinds of truth. In other words, there's a truth if I say that it's, in a sense, uncontroversial. If I said, it is absolutely true that in the human past, that humans, as well as other homos, in a sense, in our genealogy line, made stone tools. I will die on that hill. You know what I'm saying? If I said that is an absolute, undeniable, will never change fact unless reality isn't real. I don't know that too many archaeologists would be able to somehow debunk it. but all I'm trying to say is, so that is trying to show the difference. Mm-hmm. That is different than a hypothesis that could change. In a sense, or a speculation of mine that could alter or could change or morph or whatever. This fact, so in other words, this is why I think it relates, what people don't realize, to the statement, extraordinary claims. This is a simple claim. Extraordinary claims will require extraordinary evidence.
Yeah, I used that quote in there. Yeah, I used that quote in there, and it was interesting. I was thinking of it almost sort of hackneyed, sort of cliche, because it is a little bit of a cliche. And I have an interesting belief about cliches. I don't think cliches are necessarily bad on the face.
They help learn because you can simplify things. That's why I try to break thinking down to make it simplified, to help people grasp really hard concepts. So to me, in a sense, that's why I teach and I really wish science would adopt this, is, in a sense, belief etiquette. There's a proper way you should approach beliefs. Because in a sense, when you say you know something, that's an epistemic property of belief. When you say you're certain of any amount, it's a epistemic property of belief. So it's really about, in other words, you can't call something a fact, but I don't believe it. You see, it in a sense, it's a contradiction internally. So it makes it illogical, thus you shouldn't say it. So what I'm saying is, when you realize there's a variation of things, it allows you to, and science does this. Science doesn't just take all these global things and it looks at the detail of the detail of the detail of the detail, and then guess what? Let's look at some more detail. I'm just saying, so to me, thinking should be the same way. You shouldn't lump ideas together, which I feel like Graham Hancock just does tons of that.
He does.
Hey, all these look like something, then they must be created by the exact same people. That's why I said my thinking is it's just a spread mythological belief system that inspires this building. And then other cultures pick it up and some stop it. Some do and then don't do no more. So, but it has nothing to do, it's indigenous people. So I saw my all indigenous people. I don't think that other people were, in a sense, giving them this thing, No
great Atlantean sages.
No. So I'm just saying, but so I don't and I say I feel it's still kind of loose because I think it relates to the Altai Mountains. There's tons of native DNA that goes there. There's tons from in that area also, and relating to the ancient North Eurasians, their DNA spread out all over from there. But to me, that's not a massively like his thing. It's not a culture we don't know about. It's not, saying, a fanciful thing that's so beyond, I'm just saying that this idea, and I know China has tons of mountain beliefs, and so does, which has to do with probably the tree of life and all kinds of other stuff. But it's all mythological, and it's not that one culture taught all the cultures. It's that I feel North Asia especially had these shamanistic kind of related beliefs, and then they ended up spreading around. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, this idea of the extraordinary evidence thing is it's one of the most obvious examples of this of Sagan's notion is this show in some ways, because Hancock is simultaneously making a very extraordinary claim by
extraordinary.
Archaeologists usually, and all scientists, but archaeologists is certainly true, and it's very much true for me in our own research, work in the detail, right? We see ourselves in some ways working in a large aggregate, because we recognize, like, I'm working on this one little site, and we're going to get little insights from that, and together with all the other archaeologists working, maybe we will eventually learn some bigger things. It's been weird working in this sort of public archaeology sphere and doing science communication, because I find myself, and I'm uncomfortable with it, I'll be honest, it makes me uncomfortable, reckoning with a lot of large questions, sort of big human nature sort of questions. Whereas my training is in, like, oh man, I don't know, I'm talking about like counting the number of types of ceramic sherds at my site, man. That's where I'm at. And like, we're trying to use little teeny, right, scraping away to do an intentional pun, scraping away at the truth little by little. And so to make a big statement about these huge issues is rare in science. So Hancock is simultaneously doing that. He's making this huge claim about this massive, right? The answer to everything. Where did agriculture come from? Where did what he calls civilization, which is a really problematic term, right? Obviously, but what he calls civilization, but he refuses to define. But he's, it's like pornography. You know it when you see it, right? Civilization and whatever, complex societies, monumental architecture, every megalith in the world, all that stuff comes from this one place, this one culture. So that's a huge claim. And he's saying it with no evidence, none, right. Not even like ordinary evidence, not a single artifact, not a single site, not a single scrap of DNA, nothing. It's all conjecture, right? It's like, isn't that interesting? You mentioned before, like, I call that like this thing looks like that thing conjecture, which is like the classic is, there's pyramids in Mexico and there's pyramids in Egypt, so they must be the same thing. It's like,
must be built by Egyptians or by the South Americans.
Yeah, and it's like that. There's a term for that. We call that equifinality, right? This idea that the same idea, roughly, and there's a lot of differences between those pyramids. Let's be honest, they're really actually not the same thing at all. But there is one effect can come from multiple causes in different places, and that is unsexy, right? Like that is not like the most exciting thing in the world, because we want to, there's something fascinating about finding that one keystone solution to everything. But,
like
the real world's more complicated than that.
He says, I know that a ridiculous statement. He says that the advanced mathematics and advanced technology of how to build these stones all came from the Ice Age. It's just ludicrous.
We have that's why the archaeologists keep saying, and I think that, again, right, we're not communicating this strongly enough. We need to build up what we mean by this. But when you just say, show me the evidence, what we mean by that is archaeologists, like all scientists, right, we deal in evidence, and every science is its own form of evidence. Our evidence is the sites, artifacts, anything. Show us something. Show us this. I mean, we were going to talk about the Younger Dryas before. Maybe this is a good transition into that. Hancock has decided that he's got a solution for this. Why is there no evidence? for Atlantis? Why don't we have any artifacts in this? Well, Atlantis was wiped out by an apocalypse. That's where the apocalypse, the eponymous ancient apocalypse comes from.
That's right.
Yes, this is there is an apocalypse that wiped them out, except for a handful of sages who apparently lived for 10,000 years and were teaching the Egyptians how to build pyramids. But it's 10,000 years later. 10,000 years, by the way, that's a long time. Well, we can get into that. But the Younger Dryas impact, which I am not an expert on, I've read a bunch of I've read the papers on it since getting into this, because it's such an integral part of the show. And I had read one or two of them back in the day because they were very controversial when the YDIH papers came out. I remember them being hugely controversial. And I remember, the debate happening somewhere far away, because it's a really different kind of archaeology than I do. But now I've read a lot about them. And this is this theory that at the end of the Pleistocene, and I'm going to paraphrase this quite a lot because it's actually quite complex, of course, but at the end of the Pleistocene, at the end of the Ice Age, there's this period where it's getting warmer and wetter, and then there's suddenly like a drop off where it gets kind of cold and dry again for a little while, and then it goes back and continues along the trajectory. I have been assured by geologists and people who study ancient environments that this is normal. This is a common thing that can happen. Like, it's not always a straight line, right? Ice ages don't end in like a perfect linear line. They jig up and down.
Nature doesn't just have some perfect drop off.
Exactly, right. So that's the idea, right? So why did this happen? But it's a reasonable question to ask. Why did that happen, right? That's okay. Absolutely. People have been interested in this forever. That period is called the Younger Dryas. And why did it happen is one question, and then what did it impact is the second.
Please explain Younger Dryas.
The Younger Dryas is that period where things are getting warmer and wetter, and then it snaps back to more Pleistocene environment for a period of like a few hundred years, and then it warms back up again. And that had huge impacts. It did have impacts on cultures in many parts of the world. You can see it happen. You can see societies that were growing will suddenly like sort of collapse back down. And so it did. It had impacts. Of course it did. Right? It had impacts on people around the world. Mm-hmm. But what caused it, other than it's just a natural part of earth science and of the environment changing and shifting, this group of people they call themselves like the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, I don't know, cabal or something. They got a name, they got a nickname, they got jackets, I'm not sure, but they got together and they theorized that this was caused by an asteroid, like a meteor strike that hit the earth somewhere in the polar ice caps, or maybe it was a mini burst where it exploded in the atmosphere, and this caused rapid changes. And so this is where supposedly the sea levels rose so fast that it wiped out whole civilizations, like truly apocalyptically. And the biggest problem with this is that the papers that are supposed to support this have largely been debunked. Like, some of them were literally fraudulent. Like, they had like photoshopped images in them and like fake figures and stuff. Like, really,
that should be like something that they should be like losing their freaking credibility bad, man.
Yeah, there's a scientist who studies these things called Mark Boslow, and he's on Twitter, and maybe you've seen some of his tweets and stuff. But he's not an archaeologist. He studies meteor impacts. That's like, he's like that. I don't know what you call that. He's not a meteorologist. That's a different thing. Should be meteorologist. That's a weather person. But it should be meteorist. I don't know.
That's funny.
I'm not sure what the title of it is, but that's his specialty, and he has been writing for a really long time about
cosmologist. Maybe
no, cosmology. That's like religion and stuff. Cosmologists tend to study like.
Well, of course, I do think sometimes that when. To me, whether it happened or not, I think, like you said it before, they're trying to make religious connections to it. It seems.
What is it? Person who studies meteors, meteoritics. Ooh, cool. A specialist who studies meteoritics is known as a meteoriticist. Cool. I'm Googling on the fly.
Meteorologist was already taken. So
my knowledge about the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis runs into a wall there, because a lot of times you read the papers, and the paper's like, okay, this seems reasonable, because scientific papers are supposed to be reasonable, and they're written in a certain language. And if you don't really know what you're looking at, it can be quite easy to fool people with. And some of those papers, a very famous one about the supposed city of Sodom, this is later obviously, right, but like the biblical city of Sodom was supposedly destroyed by like a microburst in the atmosphere, and it was supposed to prove that got published in Nature. It's like the biggest journal in the world. And the paper is supposedly like total bullshit, like that, from everybody I know who's like it's like legitimately fraudulent. They published it in Nature. So how do you, that's the highest of the high. That's the the Nobel Prize of many disciplines, is to get a paper in Nature.
But I have a question. So after the challenge, they didn't change, because there was a paper that came out that I actually kind of sourced, and I put a link that it is, but I also put a link that it got debunked, because the part that got debunked really doesn't matter to me. The part that got debunked is that the claim was, after cultures got about 1 million, I think it is, then they create a god or whatever. That part got debunked. I didn't totally buy that anyway, so I'm like, yeah.
I'm not usually convinced by I don't know, metrics like that. Like, I mean, I'm a relative. I'm a what you call a relativist or a historical particularist, which is what Boaz called it. Which is, I think individual cultures have their own historical trajectory. That's largely, this is why I'm find myself quite skeptical, because of Hancock. He's like the ultimate universalist, which is the opposite of that.
Right.
Everything comes from a single source, right? The Atlantean sages taught everybody everything, and everything comes from the same place. And if you find two places where humans revere water, that means they must be connected with each other. Dude, water is pretty important, right? Like, I think you literally will die if you don't get it for a day. It's important. Like, of course, multiple cultures revere water. It's what a so the idea that two cultures on different parts of the planet, separated by thousands of years, could both develop a cosmology centered around water is not that hard for me to accept. Like, that's just,
yeah.
So, but that's,
yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. So, I mean, yeah, like I
so,
said,
that's my training, and that's where I tend to end up flying. I don't love those sort of labels either, right? Because if you label yourself too concretely, if I say to myself, I'm a cultural relativist and through and through, and I
don't totally agree with cultural relativism, but
you can get stuck in a rut. You can get paradigmatic. You can get unwilling to accept new evidence, no matter what, no matter how reasonable your supposition is. So it's like, are there universal solutions to things? Maybe, right? There might be some. And
this goes back to what I didn't finish. So I have this thing called belief etiquette. Okay, belief etiquette just has 3 main steps. They're the ethics of belief, how you should ethically approach beliefs. So the first one is, you should always seek to have reasoned belief acquisitions. That means when you try to get beliefs, you want them to be reasoned. But nobody is 100% perfect, and all kinds of beliefs, we're like a belief, catching machine. We pick up beliefs that are inaccurate all the time. So this is why, to me, it's extremely important to have a system of how to remove them. Then you should have, to me, in a sense, the next thing always do is good belief maintenance. Constantly recheck. Because in fact, like I had told Cory, I had saw this book say that could be 60,000 years in America. I went, ridiculous. Cory, it's only 24. Then I went and looked a little more and go, okay, maybe it's 50. Oh, maybe I should just shut up. I don't.
Yeah, I'm not willing to say I know for sure. And there are a lot of archaeologists who will be like, there's no way there's any sites that are older than 25,000. I think we've been fooled before. I just think, like, is it likely that there's a site that's 130,000 years old in North America? Referring back to the Cerruti Mass and saying, I think it's unlikely, but I need more evidence. Well, if you watch that, I need more evidence than that paper's willing to give me. But sure, it could happen. I don't know. We've been fooled before. So anyway, but I interrupted again.
No, I was saying, so to me, good belief maintenance, and this I don't think should be limited to science. I think it's just in general, everyone. And if you approach all the beliefs of your life, where every once in a while, even things you were sure of, you go ahead and if you're willing to, Not wait for others to challenge you. You challenge you. Look at those beliefs and re-challenge them as a part of your belief etiquette to naturally do this. That nothing is above. That's my only skeptical thing is in one sentence. All beliefs are always open to being amended or removed upon valid and reliable reason and evidence. And I want to say something too about truth, because I do think science could produce truth. And I do think science proves things. I think that it's a semantics game. But I will say that how science thinks, I know, but I want to clarify for at least my own position. There is no such thing as one person can make truth in science. To me, there's not ever a theory, not a hypothesis, but a theory confirmed from, in a sense, a valid hypothesis being tested over and over and over again by one person. So no theory is done by one person. That's not science. There's no truth claim, because it should be, in a sense, a conglomeration of all this stuff, and then what is produced after that is truth. But to me, it's still, there's always, it's the rule, all things are always open to being amended or changed upon valid and reliable reason and evidence. But to me, so belief maintenance, how to, and this is why I say, when someone is challenged and they get defensive, I'm thinking, you should be challenging yourself.
Yeah, it's having the idea of that belief maintenance. It teaches you a level of humility that
right.
If somebody challenges your beliefs, well, I'm already challenging my own beliefs all the time. So
that's what I'm saying. You should be like, no problem, right? Because it's a healthy way to think.
Yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready for it.
One is honest belief relinquishment. This is one of the hardest things to do. Is it's something that you believe. When the facts walk away, you need to walk away from the belief.
Yeah. And it is hard to do, right? And I think that we don't do ourselves a service in science communication by pretending like that's not hard to do, right? That somebody who has believed something for maybe decades, and then you present them the evidence and you go, well, why didn't they change their mind right away? Well, that's been a core tenet of their life for 30 years, and maybe it's wrong, but to pretend like that's just something they can just snap. People can't do that. Nobody can do that. Even those of us who do practice, I think this way of thinking, that's hard to do. It's really hard to do.
But I want to really thank you that I think that, like you showed, at least demonstrated on the channel and are demonstrating now, is a real openness. Because I feel like this is a critique. Graham Hancock says that, that archaeologists are not open. Like, that's just absolutely not true.
Some of them are. I mean, people are people, right? Like some.
Right, yeah. Oh, I'm not saying they're all perfect. I'm just saying.
But I think it's more in like this is a really. I like this breakdown of these different ways of thinking about belief. I like that a lot. And this idea of belief relinquishment. Some archaeologists that I know aren't so good at that, and I don't think that's because they're archaeologists. I don't think it's because they're scientists. I don't think it's because they're trying to hide the truth. It's just like it takes a level of humility and practice that maybe they haven't done that work. I don't know, so what I mean, or they might just feel really passionate about a particular belief, and you need to give them that extraordinary evidence. I liked your idea before, and it really made me think about that, like the nature, the semantics of truth, right? Was like, okay, we've been making stone tools. Humans and other members of the genus Homo have been making stone tools. Right, going all the way back.
Not be an absolute truth.
So if, to me and you, to us, and to every archaeologist I know, that's an absolute truth that has been proven so many times.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm trying to grasp. The difference between regular people's communication and what they think truth is. One person can decide what is true. Damien can have a speculation. We're done. It's true. Graham Hancock has a speculation. It's true. That is zero to do with science. Zero.
Or to do with truth, really.
Is an individual's property. Truth is something that happens because I break down what's the difference between religion and science. I show that, to me, everything starts, in a sense, has started in rational reason. Because aren't some hypotheses not even reasonable? Certainly. If I said my socks are gone and it has to be aliens, because I watched on History Channel and there's ancient aliens, so I know that's where my sock is from my dryer. I mean, some things to me are not even worthy. They're like, why would you test that? You're an archaeologist. You need to look for ancient aliens for stealing my sock. And an archaeologist logically goes, Yeah, that claim is so ridiculous, it doesn't even require being debunked. It is on its face. It's pretty, unworthy. And so I'm just saying that's why I told Cory before. I realized it. You know what? I need to start saying I do speculations more. That's what I'm really feeling. Mm-hmm. But I grasp people aren't understanding. I'm not claiming truth because Damien does not believe one person can invent truth. So, especially when you talk about anything science and archaeology or any other kind of science, nobody just goes, I got it. I know what, and I decide, and I make well. Then I don't find that to be truth. So in that sense, science doesn't do truth if it's an individual, but science is a process of analyzing things, and what comes out of that can withstand the cauldron of challenge, can be accepted as truth, but still with I told you, to me, with the rational skepticism of science that says all things should always be open to being amended or replaced upon valid and reliable reason and evidence. Is that simple? I mean,
yeah. Even on the stone tool thing, one of the reasons I think that's a fun example is because it's suddenly kind of relevant again. Is the gradations of truth in that being, we all know that that's true and it's been proven by tremendous amounts of evidence.
Right.
Others will never accept that as truth because they don't. If you don't believe in human evolution, you believe the Earth's only 6,000 years old. Well, then that's right out right there. So obviously, there's some people who are not going to accept that as truth. They need to recognize that they're not thinking scientifically there, and maybe that's okay, right? That's a faith belief, and okay, whatever. It's a different thing. Like you said, the differences between faith and science. But then even then, there's
faith. Just real quick. So faith can make a one person equals truth, but that is never science.
Yeah,
that's my point.
Yeah, and that's why I think that's why it's really clarifying, because I've been drawn to these discussions of Hancock of saying he's really making a faith-based argument, and wouldn't it be nice if he just sort of admitted that and sort of said, like, I think this is a spiritual story about our connections to a religious, in a religious sense. And if he had said that and not tried to convince everybody that archaeologists should accept his ideas as factual without evidence, I don't think anybody would have complained. It would have been like, okay, like whatever. That's an interesting idea, and it's if it's helping you explore your spirituality, go wild, man. Go buck wild.
Which is exactly the same point. I would never have addressed it. I only like real stuff, and so I with no interest for that. It's like no. It's like, say, we're going to have the Little Mermaid on and we're going to figure out if it's real or not. Yeah. And our show doesn't deal with that. Okay.
And yeah, there wasn't it. Remember that? That was like the granddaddy of all of these sort of pseudoscientists. I remember that when somebody, Discovery or somebody, put out a documentary about mermaids, and it was like a fake documentary that pretended mermaids were real, and like a huge number of people believed it and still do. So people will be like, no, mermaids are real. I saw a documentary about it. And it's like, oh my God, you gotta be willing to question that. Like, okay, you saw that documentary. Yeah, but we didn't even get into that, right? The nature of truth as when fraud is involved, right? Like that's my picture.
Yeah, I totally agree. But like I said, it still would be that you have to produce something that's not just from you. In other words, like if other people are all challenging it, then to me, it can't be claimed as true. I don't know if you guys. The preponderance of the evidence is why you finally get to what is true, not because just one sparkling thing is so great, like the stone tool thing. It's not just you find one or a few. It's a million stone tools or something all over the earth. I mean, at what point can you just say this is a fact that there is stone tools that were produced by
Yeah, and then I made this little teeny quick little video the other day that I'm having fun with these little. I challenged myself. Can I make something start to finish in like 2 hours? And so it made this little teeny 4-minute video. It was just about a cool new site, real basic, like ARMBA, whatever. But that is in this sort of realm, and it's about Paranthropus, which is a different genus that we're closely related to, breaks off from Australopithecines before the emergence of Homo, and in that complicated.
Oh, we lost him all of a sudden.
Hopefully he comes back.
Yeah.
It was going good. Getting to Francis, Boise, and all that good stuff.
Did he lose his internet connection? It looks like because he, like even his upload just stopped and everything. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, it was great having him.
Yep.
So, what would you feel, or what is your? Because I have my own, of course, bias in thinking about archaeologists and stuff.
He's back.
We got it. Yeah, I was when my picture froze, and then you guys froze, and I was like, something happened. So I just signed out and signed back in, and it appears to have fixed it.
So, anyways, you were talking about the hominids. I don't remember exactly, but I joked with him. I said Paranthropus boisei because I just think the name sounds fun.
Yeah, they're cool. Paranthropus boisei, Paranthropus robustus. They're cool. They're these really cool critters. I don't know critters. They're similar to us in a lot of ways, or to our ancestors at that time, 2-3 million years ago. But they're these really robust creatures. They have these huge like crests on their head, on their skulls, massive jaw muscles because they were. But there's this kind of sense over time that they're kind of like our dumb cousins of that time period, which is like they were somehow like less evolved. Their brains weren't as sophisticated as the more gracile, delicate Australopithecines that would eventually become us. And yet this site was just reported on in Kenya that suggests that Paranthropus, this species, might actually have been using Oldowan stone tools, which is the oldest stone tool technology in the world.
Well, Lithuanian, I think, is older. It's 3.3 million.
Yeah. So it's like
or whatever it's called, something like
that. Yeah. There's some, obviously there's some discuss, what's the actual oldest stone tools, but this would be really early, like way earlier than we thought.
Oh yeah. I'm not saying it's before. To me, I think at 1 million years is almost like a pseudo superstition, because the stone tools start getting this sort of universal shapes. I mean, from like kind of like all over the place to like what is somebody like watching them and they gotta fit a plan or something? I mean, it seems way overworked than just for utility.
Yeah, the emergence of the Acheulean hand axe,
exactly.
Which that teardrop shape, and you find them all over Africa and Europe, and they're used by Neanderthals and Homo sapiens and Homo erectus. Incredible. They made the Clovis point, which is around for a long time and in a wide area, look like a breezy trend, or something. But yeah, at this point, so it's just like suddenly it's like, okay, so that fact that was stone tools are this human expression that's been around for all this time. Well, now it's like, okay, well now we've got animals that didn't become humans. They're using stone tools too. Does that make me reanalyze my thinking about this basic fact of life that I accept as true? Maybe in a broadening way instead of a narrowing way, not in like an, that stone tools, but now I have to sort of accept that truth as being somehow broader than it was before, right? And so it was an opportunity to question my own thinking about that. And I don't know if I was closer to that. Anytime I talk about human evolution stuff, and I feel slightly nervous because that's so far outside my like specialization zone. And I have a lot of friends who are paleoanthropologists, which is what they call themselves, folks who work in that particular realm.
Right.
And I learn a lot from them, and I can read the articles and understand them, but it's opposite end of the world from literally opposite end of the world and time. I study like the last couple of 100 years, not 3 million years ago. It's like really far. And so, but I definitely have beliefs. I have strong beliefs about that from everything I've learned as an archaeologist. And yet like all the time, I'm humbled all the time on the human evolution stuff, because we learn so much so often. One new fossil is found and the whole story gets reshuffled. One new DNA study comes out and suddenly there's whole new species of hominin kicking around that we don't even know about.
Right. Yeah. I remember West Africa.
Yeah. The Denisovans are a great example, right? This is this hominin that lived at the same time as Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, probably in Asia. And I remember when I was an undergraduate, the Denisovans were like fringe theory. That was like only crazy people thought that. And like there's an archaeologist who sadly his name was Brian Jones. He was the state archaeologist of Connecticut, and he was a mentor of mine one of many mentors, and he sadly passed away a few years ago of cancer. He was a young man, which really sucked. Anyway, but he was a weirdo in a good way. He was a guy who always was like willing to think hard about even the weird stuff. And I remember he was the only person back then who was like, yeah, those Denisovans, I think that might be real. Like he was the only one in the world. And he has been proven right by the genetic studies. This was years before we really knew anything about DNA. You know, it was just, there was some DNA studies, but it was really, really, you know, early work. And he was so ahead on the curve on that. And that's just how he was. And I really admired that about him. And I wonder, you know, my desire to be more like him and to be more willing to, you know, just be really open-minded and think outside the box. I mean, sometimes his ideas were crazy and he was definitely wrong. But he was willing to be, right? He had that humility to be like, oh yeah, I don't know, I was wrong about that. It's okay.
Which is what I've told Cory before. I intentionally like to come on and say I'm wrong about things.
Yeah.
Often. No, but not because I you know, as some kind of game or something. Because I think it's good epistemic behavior. It's healthy. It's healthy to realize that two things really big. One, I could be wrong, so I need to get this. So anything I believe. I would say my beliefs really should be called speculations because I'm willing to change them in a sense. I don't own the belief is what I mean. Some people they believe something. Yeah, I try really hard not to have that kind of belief.
Yeah, like a faith-based belief. You know? Yeah, the whole point of a faith-based belief is that you believe it without evidence, right? And again, that's the cornerstone of, well, at least Christianity, right? Which is the only religion I have personal experience with, like growing up Catholic, and that was what we were taught, was like, you're not supposed to question these beliefs. You're supposed to accept. That's the whole point. That's what makes them good. You're accepting that, you're taking that leap of faith. And again, I'm not, you know, I don't want to tell somebody that they're wrong for having that sort of belief, but that is the opposite of science, and it's okay for it to be the opposite of science, right? It's okay.
Well, yeah, I wanted to talk about that too. So I don't think that, because I've heard someone say before that someone who does stuff is automatically related to archaeology as pseudoarchaeology. I think that's an oversimplification, because I think there's a lot of things that are just not archaeology, but they're also not pseudoscience or, you know, pseudoarchaeology, and they could even be, in a sense, not explaining the full truth, but they're still not pseudoarchaeology. So I at least to me. So, but I wanted to hear your opinion and what your thoughts are. In other words, like if you had, let's just say Graham Hancock, how many things would you have to take away from the claims he made before you could say this is relatively true?
A lot, right? But you could get there.
Can you explain it? Because I want people to grasp how freaking wrong it is.
I think you could. I agree with you very much that the label of pseudoscientist can be used as a bludgeon, right? And it can be used to shut down thinking that's sufficiently outside the box, right? So do we say, if somebody is simply asking the question or willing to say, you know, we could go back to this like peopling thing because we've been there a lot, right? Yeah. I think it's possible that there are sites in North America that are more than 100,000 years old. That is, I think there are some who would say that that's thinking that way is pseudoarchaeology. I don't know if I'm willing to think to say that counts as pseudoarchaeology, just asking that question, because we have pushed back that date again and again and again. And is it possible it gets there? Maybe. It would require us to really reshuffle our understanding of a lot of things. But it's I don't think that's pseudoscientific to do that. I also think that if Hancock had simply been what he sort of says he's doing, which is just asking questions,
right,
I don't think that's necessarily pseudoarchaeology. To note similarities in the mythologies between different cultures and say, isn't that interesting? What's the deal with that? Maybe we can explore that. That's not pseudoarchaeology. That's a hypothesis. That's a reasonable thing to test. It becomes pseudoarchaeology to me, and I haven't really thought this question through, so I'm hopefully I'm saying this intelligently. When you do what Hancock does and a lot of others do, which is come in with what's more of a belief. Hancock says, I believe that all cultures in the world learned everything they knew of importance from Atlantean sages 15,000 years ago. I know that to be true. And so I'm just looking for the evidence that proves me right. And if you're doing that, that's cherry picking evidence. And that I would say is definitely pseudoscientific, because it is like counter to the very nature of what science is, which is asking a question and then letting the evidence take you where it will take you. He's not willing to let the evidence take him where it would take him, because he would then realize that none of the evidence he's presenting actually says what he says it does. So that's, I think, oh man, maybe I'll email you in a week after I've thought about this nonsense. It's
well, and if you could, I'll add it, to the blog, because I mean, my goal is not that Damien is the only one that can come up with ideas. I just feel like I seem to be able to have a lot of good ideas, and I try to share them. And sometimes I find that, like I said, I thought I knew the age of coming to the Americas, and I started reading more stuff, and I realized
it's more of an open question than you might think.
I'm like, okay, I felt really confident, and my confidence now realizes but that to me goes back to the belief maintenance. I thought, well, why don't I go look? Instead of just saying I already know because I looked before, why don't I go look again? When I looked again, okay, maybe I need to amend my beliefs right now.
I found people have found that off-putting sometimes when I'm speaking to people, like on social media or how I present myself in videos, in that I will often really say, like, I don't know the answer to that. And honestly, I don't know that anybody knows the answer to that. So if somebody's telling you we know exactly when the earliest people came to the Western Hemisphere, I don't think anybody knows that for sure. I think we really there's a lot of open questions about that, and whether that date gets moved forward or back, because even the sites that have been pretty well accepted, like the New Mexico footprint site, which is like it seems like a pretty good site that's relatively new. I definitely know some archaeologists who are like, I got some issues with how they did that. Like, I want to see more. And like, I don't think that how they dated that was really how I would have done it. And they're not saying there's no way that site's real. I think what they're trying to say is, like, it's an extraordinary claim to push back, again, another several thousand years. And so to say, all right, I'm hoping to get more evidence. And sometimes archaeology doesn't work that way, because we can't just run an experiment, right? Like, I guess for like a chemist, you could just keep running an experiment again and again, right? That's what we talk about reproducibility in science, the idea that you should be able to reproduce your experiment somewhere else.
But wouldn't you, maybe I'm in error. I would have thought that there's a lot of, not every single piece of fact or evidence is reproducible in archaeology, but a lot, to me.
Oh yeah.
I understand a lot are.
A lot of them are.
I'm wrong.
But what I think, I think a lot of them are. I think where we run into a problem in archaeology, or a challenge, I'm going to call it a problem, but it's something that we have to deal with, is that the evidence is in the ground somewhere, or it's not. And whether we can find it is a big question sometimes. So especially for these, when we talk about stuff that's really old, which tends to be stuff that people are really interested in, these human evolution things, some of these species that we know about in Africa, we know from a single fossil or maybe a handful of fossils. Paleontologists have this same problem, right? They have species that are defined by a single bone from a single fossil. And you can't just go out and find more of them. It doesn't work like that. There are people who are spending their whole careers trying desperately to find more evidence of that fossil. And maybe they do, maybe they don't. So that's where I think that's a difference that I see in a science like archaeology, or paleontology is another good example, where we are limited to a certain extent by what's actually in the ground and whether we can in fact find it, as opposed to maybe some other scientists who can say, well, I can mix those chemicals together as many times as I need to test that 1,000 times to see if it really is reproducible again and again and again and again. And you should. That's considered good practice in those kinds of sciences. Sometimes in archaeology, we can't do that. Site's dug up once, it's gone once we excavate it. Mm-hmm. We do our best to keep track of where everything came from, and we present it. And a single site that's 25,000 years old is, I don't know, we can't reproduce that in the sense that I can't just go out and find another site like it. Without getting real lucky, I guess. Right. So I don't know what the answer. I don't know if that means that archaeology is not reproducible. I think when people say that,
but like I said, for me personally, I don't think that, because it's how you just said that, it sounds too global. I don't think archaeology is reproducibility. I don't think all of archaeology is reproducibility.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
Well, I'm just, to me personally, like a rationalist, I really care. I know, right? And I even started the video. I even said I was wrong last time because I said a thing in a way that. Differently.
Yeah, I think it really it's there's some semantics in this for sure, and sometimes that gets. I've seen that claim thrown at archaeologists as a gotcha, as a kind of a bad faith attack, which is, well, your evidence is not reproducible. It's like, well, oftentimes those people don't really know what that means, right? Like, they don't think they really know what that, or they do know what it means, and they're being intentionally misleading about what it means because they're trying to say it's not real science because it's not reproducible. And it's
or they say that it's not real science because it doesn't use scientific method. The problem is there's not one, and never has been one historically scientific method, because every discipline, in a sense, approaches it as relating to its discipline. So it has a standard like theme. Even when people say everything has to be falsifiable, no, that's a goal.
Yeah,
that's not what actually comes out of the ground and how things are done.
Yeah, it's you can't, right? We are limited. Archaeology is a science in which we are. It's a material science. We're always going to be limited to a certain extent by what is actually in the ground and can be found. Like preservation is a classic example. We are always going to struggle with the fact that different materials preserve at very different rates. So the fact that archaeologists talk about stone tools a lot probably has much more to do with the fact that stone is the best preserving material in the world. When somebody picks up a rock and hits it with another rock and turns it into a stone tool, that rock is already millions or maybe even billions of years old. And so another couple tens of thousands is nothing. So, right. So rocks last forever. So we find them all over the place. Whereas people absolutely, just like we do today, have intense, powerful connections emotionally, practically, in every other way we can imagine, with fabrics, with things made of bone, things made of wood, things made of paper, things made of plant material, animal material, and all of those things don't preserve in most cases. So when we excavate a site, we are not getting a perfect representation of what was left there in the past. We're getting a facsimile of that thing that existed in the past. And so we have to use the scientific method and, to some extent, conjecture to try and flesh out what we think was there in the past. So archaeology, I would argue, always has a level of subjectivity. And some people are uncomfortable with that, or they feel like that means that nothing that we do is valuable. And I don't think that that's right or fair, right? All science actually has some subjectivity in it. Archaeology, by its nature, has to, right? We have to kind of try and assess, based on, maybe we have exceptional preservational circumstances in one place, right? We get sites that are really well preserved. Otzi's kind of the classic example, right? This guy, he got frozen in a glacier, and then he melted out, and we learned so much from that one guy because we could see what the clothes he was wearing. We could see the tattoos on his skin. We could see the food that was in his stomach when he died. All these amazing details that normally do not get preserved. What would have actually been left of him in a traditional site? It would have been the point and the tip of his arrows, and would have been a handful of scraps of evidence. So I guess that's what, I don't know if that's really the same thing as falsifiability or reproducibility, but it is a level of subjectivity within the science that some people see as an avenue through which to attack the science itself. And I think that that's silly, right? It's like,
but isn't it odd that the ones that are attacking it usually have beliefs that are actually more pseudo or subjective, for sure, at least? I mean, even if you want to be the most positive to them, okay, wouldn't you say that if you say archaeology is subjective, okay, wouldn't you say that your belief though of Atlantis is even more subjective?
I think they're trying to create a false equivalency. They want to say, well, you're willing to admit, and maybe this is why some archaeologists are not willing to. I mean, I'm willing to say that out loud, that I think that there is some subjectivity in all archaeological work. Some archaeologists probably strongly disagree with me about that. And maybe part of the reason for that is that it's easy to then just, maybe I'm being naive, I guess, because you can pretty easily draw a false equivalency and say, well, you're saying what you do is subjective. And isn't what Graham Hancock's doing subjective? So they're really the same. It's like, well, They're not.
They're not. Let me explain how a really easy way to understand that they're not.
I would say that they're not
logic
because
doesn't prove itself.
Yeah.
This is something people try to say all the time. Oh, logic doesn't prove itself. And I go, okay, but you're assuming there wasn't, in a sense, pre-logic.
Yeah.
It got us to that logic is the best way.
Yeah.
I think the same thing with archaeology. It doesn't always, science doesn't always have, just like when people say, well, there must be life because our planet has life. And so because of that, but they don't realize, yeah, but our planet could have actually been thrown off its axis from another now extinct planet. And that's where we get our big moon, because that's not normal. And so if you said every planet that has a big moon, maybe you have a better. But what they think is only because the planet is the third from the sun or whatever, distance, that's a Goldilocks zone. That's actually, to me, still a fallacy, because it's more factors than one factor of why there's life. If you don't have the big moon, guess what you don't have is tidal. If you don't have tidal, then I don't know how you get your primordial soup to have life start. To me, I mean, so I put this point is, so if you look at all these planets, just a planet, even its furthest from the sun, doesn't actually tell you if it could have life. There's more factors that produce life on Earth. And I feel like archaeology is the same. It's complex.
Yeah.
Like I was saying about what a stone tool, I didn't know how to explain that it both biface, both sides are chipped. It's a core, it's the whole, tool, not a piece of the tool or a small off lift or something. But so there's so much, and there's way more than that. I mean, obviously, there's so much more complexity that I know that people don't like you've ever seen on Twitter or Facebook, too long didn't read. Yeah, that's a common thinking. In general, we love generalizations. You know why? Because we don't have to think. That's why, as a deep thinker, I try to really challenge myself. I don't agree that there's never some time that something could be generalized, but boy, that should be something that we hold with some serious skepticism, because that's not common. We group things together. That is not always that they're rightly grouped together.
Yeah, I think this might be as another core facet of what makes something a pseudoscience, is that what Hancock wants to do in this show is create a simple explanation. It makes everything seem so simple, right? There's one solution to everything. Atlantis solves all the questions. It tells us exactly where everything came from. And what archaeologists would tell you is human culture is immensely complex. Look at the world we live in today, the diversity of culture, the diversity of way people live their lives and experiences and things we use and things we interact with and things people believe and languages and it's infinite complexity. In some way, I joke with my students always in like the first day of like an intro to anthropology class. Anthropology is the most complex science, even more complex than physics, because it's anything any human has ever done. And that's true for archaeology as well. It's so much, there's something nice and easy about, well, yeah, okay, every culture really is connected and they all have this one solution, rather than saying every culture in the world actually has its own individual historical trajectory. And really, it's even more complex than that, because what is a culture? A culture is a collection of people that are bound by some set of ideals. Well, then don't we need to track every individual's movement through the world? How could we possibly do that? We're talking about billions and billions and billions of humans who have ever lived, each one with their own cultural experiences and their own personal individual experiences mixing together to make the fabulous complexity that each one of us is. How could we recreate that as archaeologists? It's a daunting task. And so the idea that there could be some simple solution to everything is enticing. It's intoxicating. It really draws us in.
My degree is actually in psychology, and sociology, and also teaching a little bit, but and criminal behavior. But my point is, so basically psychology though, and sociology is kind of similar to me. There's just one is about person, one is more about the group in a sense. Mm-hmm. But to me, I totally get it. The desire, like I said, to me in general, it goes back to like what I think about why, in a sense, people may have started animism or prone to it in general, I mean, children, is because we don't like not understanding. It brings fear. Like I've said before, what we don't understand, we can come to fear. That which we fear, we may learn to hate. That which we hate, we may seek to destroy. So it is upon us to, when we don't understand, to stop the cycle and strive to understand, because understanding then aids us in seeing the, like I said, the more complexity, because it generally is. Even like a lot of times I try to make the whole history of religion like somewhat simplified. It's way more complex. Someone said, "Oh, Damien, your stuff is too complex." I'm like, ha, too complex. It's actually not complex enough. I'm trying to give it the like Cliff Note version, because it's actually, even like if you talk animism, there's so many different ways that's done and so many expressions of it. It's like, yeah. So I agree with you. Just alone, anyone who starts saying there's this unified single theory, it already to me goes, what?
Yeah, and you have to sort of learn, I think, to revel in that complexity, right? Because you're right, it is scary at first, and it can be scary because there's so many unknowns there, and a humility in recognizing that you will never understand all of it. But you get on the other side of that, and suddenly that complexity is like, wow, there's so much to learn. There's so much cool stuff. There's so many amazing truths out there to discover. And that can be thrilling. So it's like there is and also there's like love there too, right? I think if we want to really bring this home to something meaningful, this idea that you're actively fighting fear and bigotry and hatred by loving the complexity of the human condition is a wonderfully, it can be a tool of anti-hate, right? Like in some ways, it could be amazing for that.
Cory, why don't you, before we wrap it up, why don't you say any questions you have or thoughts that you?
Oh, I don't know. There was a lot going on.
You're the quiet one today, Cory.
Well, but just so people know, my knowledge, or what I've learned from studying, is from, in a sense, millions of years ago until 4,000. Almost every culture around the entire earth I've tried to understand since 2006. And I'm not saying I'm an expert. I'm more of a generalist in all of it than an expert in all of it. Some points I'm more, in a sense, knowledgeable than others. But my point is, so I do know that all of this is like totally in my wheelhouse to talk about, but I know that Cory didn't. Yeah. So go ahead and,
I'm going to have to read up on the Clovis first and the pre-Clovis and the Younger Dryas and all this stuff, because it's so much information that I'm just like, okay, I can absorb some of this now, but
it is. Yeah, that's like a couple weeks in an intro to archaeology class. So it's a lot of information. It really is.
But I see in our notes, we were going to talk a little bit about the racism in Hancock's ideas, and how I think you connected it to Jordan Peterson in some way.
Yeah. So a lot of people got real mad at me. I was shocked by the number of people who got mad at me in the comments because I had dissed Jordan Peterson by comparing him to Hancock. That was not what I was expecting. The thing I was actually,
it should have been the other way, right?
Yeah, the thing that drew me in that first video, I did not realize that those couple of videos that I made were going to be watched so much. They have a lot of views, and I just thought they were going to be like little things I'd throw out there and a few people would watch it and whatever. I didn't expect they would get that much traction. So when I was making the comparison to Peterson, what I was really trying to do was trying to understand like Hancock's relationship to archaeology, and also his connection to the sort of intellectual dark web, whatever they call themselves. It's this that sort of loose coalition. They're not like a real thing. And again, this is something people have yelled at me a lot for. Oh, this person's not in the IDW. This person's not in the IDW. Like the IDW is not like, again, they don't have jackets. They're not like a club, right? But it's just this sort of loose collaboration of conservative, usually conservative, sometimes very conservative thinkers, right? It's kind of supposed to be the sort of brain trust of the conservative movement, right? Online. And it has guys in it like Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson. And to some extent, Hancock is a little bit on the periphery of that group, right? He and Joe Rogan are buddies. Joe Rogan's a huge fan of his. And you know, he's like, you know, maybe the representative of archaeology in the IDW, if there is such a thing. And so I was just kind of wanted to explore that. Like, what does that mean in terms of how we might try and counter Hancock? Do we have to take him kind of seriously? And I think we do, because we can't just sort of like be like, he's just some wacko we can just ignore. I don't really know if we have the benefit of doing that, because he has a huge platform, because he is linked into all those networks, because he is getting reviews written about his, you know, Matt Walsh is going to write a review about his show. And like, right. So and then because nobody else was writing positive reviews of his show, you know, Hancock was forced to talk about how great Matt Walsh is, which is a pretty, I can't imagine that having that experience. And, you know, Matt Walsh is a scumbag. So, but that guy sucks. But he, you know, so I was just sort of trying to muse on that and trying to figure out how I felt about that and how that might impact how we should approach countering Hancock, and whether we need to really maybe take him more seriously. And I still believe that we do. And there are some archaeologists who feel like we should just be like ignoring him. Like we should just like, it'll go away. People will forget about him. And
the reason why I'm actually a big deal about trying to address this, I told you, I would like to actually never bring him up and finish my series on Mesopotamian power that I was doing. I stopped that because I'm like, okay, I don't want to deal with this, but it seems like I need to. Because to me, leftists, which I'm a leftist, and I'm not talking about liberals, I'm talking about communists and socialists and anarchists. Some of them, of course, don't like government, or they feel that archaeologists are mainstream government, and come to me, oh man, you know, look at this Graham Hancock, and I'm like, yeah, no.
He's literally on Netflix.
No,
Graham Hancock is not a friend of the left. I do not think. I don't think there's any way that you can find.
But I've also had atheists try to debate me because I post stuff on history, and they were like, "Oh, well, then you really like Graham Hancock," and I go, "Absolutely not."
Graham Hancock is not an atheist. I don't think. I think that he is a spiritual. He is a guy.
No, I agree. Okay. So I need to clarify how I said it. I'm not saying they said he's an atheist. I'm saying they said that they don't know if they can trust Christianity or science, because wrongly thinking that a lot of archaeologists are religious. But even if they are, doesn't mean. But even if they are, I don't claim that I think that they're, in a sense, unethical and do science unethically. If they do, then that's a problem. And if whether they're an atheist or a religious person. But so to me, what I mean is they were saying, oh, we can't trust like the Bible and society because of that kind of stuff. It's to me like conspiracy theory. But Graham Hancock is showing we can't even trust some parts of science. And I'm like, whoa, I need to address this shit.
Yeah, and it's another one of these kernel of truth things, which is he's an expert at that, right? The idea that are there unethical practices in archaeology? Absolutely. Are there archaeologists who uphold racism and white supremacy? Sure. Are those things being criticized from within archaeology? Yes, but almost certainly not enough, right? We have these internal debates constantly, and that's good. That's how the science moves forward ethically. But Hancock has spun that out into an idea that that's all archaeology is conspiracy theory and whatever. And I don't agree with that. As somebody, you know, who's inside that all the time, I don't think that that's true. So yeah, that first video, that was all I was really trying to do with the Peterson connection, was trying to suss out how we can understand Hancock as a figure. I think people were still thinking of him in an outdated way, the way that he was when he was a guy who wrote crackpot books that were nonetheless popular. But now he's at a different level now, right? Part of it is the Netflix show, but another part of it is he's on Joe Rogan constantly. Joe Rogan is the biggest podcast in the world. He's got millions of listeners, and people believe the things he says, and they believe his endorsements, and he endorses Hancock's beliefs. So we're talking about millions of people being influenced by those thoughts. So that's kind of what I was trying to explore with that. The racism element to sort of explain that a little bit. And again, what I did in my video was, and what I've gotten the most flack for by far, was asked Hancock to do two things. Uh-oh, am I losing you guys again?
No.
I still got you.
Oh, good. Yeah, we had, oh, there it comes back. I'm having some, my internet's not great. Is two things. Number one, to stop basically putting a target on archaeologists back, because there was a lot of archaeologists who were getting straight up harassment, including me, but many others much worse, just straight up getting attacked. And so I said, come on, is that really necessary? Like, come on, like, I know that you don't actually think this is happening. So can you kind of calm down on the conspiratorial talk about archaeologists? Because you're going to actually put some people in danger. And the second thing was to admit that his ideas are cribbed from very old ideas that have deeply racist origins. And I'm not an expert on this, but there's been some great work written about it. I could find you links for that and stuff too. And I think some of it's probably in your blog already. But
I addressed the one that I knew. Like I said, I've done my own study outside of an archaeologist telling me it. Mm-hmm. And because I care about, I wanted to know from the oldest hints at something that could be even, sort of like pseudo spirituality to how do we get to a thing. So I already had looked into like the Upper Paleolithic in Europe. And I saw that they used to say Cro-Magnon but if you read that, it almost sounds like Graham Hancock.
Yeah, and that's not even the one I was thinking of. But you're right. There was a deep desire in Europe for a long time to find evidence that human origins actually happened in Europe.
Exactly. They didn't.
They did not, and every evidence, the Piltdown Man, and all these things were frauds. But those are inherently white supremacist. I know that term gets everybody all worked up, but it's like that they were trying to prove that they were where humanity started, because they didn't like the idea that humanity evolved out of Africa. That would be, right. It is an inherently racist thought. It just is. But Hancock's theories and a more recent.
Me and Cory are not arguing that.
Yeah. No, but in a more recent,
anti-racist,
in a more recent trajectory. In a more recent trajectory, Hancock's theories date back to stuff about Atlantis and Atlanteans. And aren't actually really attacking non-white people through a human origins way, but in a slightly more recent time period, which is this idea that indigenous people around the world were not smart enough to actually do their own stuff, right? So the beauty of the relativist perspective, that way we can see amazing cultures emerge all over the world with incredible inventions and art and the fluorescence of whatever Hancock might call civilization in all these different places, is a recognition that those people could do that on their own. So the origins of the Atlantis myth, not Plato's dialogues about it, but the idea that it was a real place. And that it was a high ice age civilization that then seeded the rest of the world with its ideas that just happened to be much more European. So there's in some of Hancock's earlier writings, he literally describes those sages as white, right? And he cherry picks indigenous ideas that might imply, right? He loves talking about the bearded sages. These are going all the way back to Ignatius Donnelly and Atlantean myths, that these sages, these white sages from Atlantis, went out from Atlantis and taught all that stuff to all of those people who were too dumb to do it themselves. They weren't cultured and smart enough to do all those things themselves. And the evidence is that that's not true, that indigenous people all over the world were perfectly capable of creating all the wonderful complexity, that beautiful complexity we were talking about before, all on their own. They didn't need sages from Atlantis to teach them.
But he's also wrong. Even let's just say, because there's ideas like, say, the chariot that comes out of Russia and swoops down into Mesopotamia and down into the Mitanni and then into Palestine, and then goes into Egypt. But you know what? Even more detail. Egypt then turns it into like a Lamborghini,
Yeah.
and then so the rough idea may have been spread, like I was saying with my idea about mountains.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's the full thing. Every culture then does their own thing, their own gods on top. It's but it's this similar thing. At one time, Graviton culture, like say in Europe, was the whole of Europe practically. So I mean, to understand that so I know Graham Hancock is trying to steal that idea, but I'm just saying is, if we look at the actual, in a sense, ethnography sort of ancient cultures, you see that, okay, so an idea was given and then they made it better all on their own. So I still don't buy your giving them everything and then, no.
There's an archaeological concept of sort of theoretical concept just called diffusion, which is just trying to understand, like, ideas do move, right? So the ideas get invented in one place and you can see them spread and change and get rehashed and so diffusion. So sometimes this theory, that Hancock is using, and he sort of presents it like these are all his own ideas, but actually most of them he stole from much older, I think, is sometimes called hyper diffusion, which is the idea that all ideas are actually all come from a single source and spread out from there. That's sometimes that's like the technical term for what Hancock does. He talks about hyper diffusion, and it's like, so again, there's complexity there, right? Is diffusion actually happen? Of course it does. Of course it does. Does diffusion explain why there are pyramids in Mexico and pyramids in Egypt? No, I don't think so. I don't think there's evidence for that. Does it explain why there might be some material similarities between cultures that are relatively close to each other in time and space? Probably yes, right? We can actually track diffusion as it moves. But more importantly than that, and then talking about anti-racism, I think is not so much that I think we get really focused as a community archaeologist on how Hancock has taken these ideas from definitely racist people in the past and has kind of used them in his work. And yes, we should be concerned about that. But I'm more worried actually about how Hancock's theories now, not the old ones, but the new ones, his version, are being used by racists to strengthen and bolster their ideas, because they can say, look, my ideas aren't radical. My ideas are ancient. My ideas go back all the way. Look at this guy, Hancock. He says my ideas go all the way back to the Atlanteans 15,000 years ago, right? So that is my concern. And there's some great work, particularly an archaeologist named Steph Helmholfer. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right, who's actually a graduate student. I think she's still a graduate student. Anyway, but she might have finished her PhD now. I have to double check and see. It doesn't matter either way. But she studies the link between pseudoscience, pseudoarchaeology, and cults, and the emergence of like cult ideologies. And like, there's some serious stuff there, like huge, like serious, like dangerous cults, your QAnon style cults,
right,
use pseudoarchaeology as important parts of their ideological underpinning. So
they're like that one white fool calling himself a shaman.
Yeah, absolutely. That guy's a great example. And I don't know what he was trying to do with that. I'm sure somebody has written about it, probably very intelligently. And I would read that article if somebody handed it to me. But I haven't read it because it's fascinating. No question that, that outfit, he believed he was referencing something, right? And that it somehow upheld his ideology, even though it clearly doesn't, right? So I think that combating pseudoscience and pseudoarchaeology can be a directly anti-racist act, because
I agree.
Because it is these beliefs are really important part of like laundering those ideas actively today, not just in the past. So part of that is definitely understanding like, Ignatius Donnelly was a super racist guy, and like ideas that he had are probably not ones we should be mimicking. But we also need to really think about how these ideas are being used right now today. And Hancock is putting those ideas in front of a much bigger audience than anybody's ever seen before, because it's on Netflix, because he's on Rogan, because of whatever, right? He's got a much bigger megaphone than I think probably anybody ever has in the past. And that's what I was trying to say in that video. Boy, did that make people mad. I got I got some weird stuff, but But yeah, maybe I do need to wrap up here because I know I got to head out in a second. But that seemed like a pretty good place to get to there.
Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you, and I really thank you for what you do. And I do agree. I think that it is absolutely science communication and valuable and needed. So what you're doing, I'm honored that you're doing it because I appreciate it. I mean, well, I'm just saying you may get a lot of hate, but it ain't coming from me.
No, I've also it's so easy to get focused on that. I've also had a lot of wonderful support and really kind people and lovely comments, and people who have the most powerful thing is people saying like, wow, this really made me think differently about these ideas, which of course is like the whole point, right? So that's the best thing to hear. You know, that's what I'm going for. Well, thank you though for having me. It's been fun to have these conversations and really enriching. So this was cool.
Right on. So go ahead and plug your channel again so people can know where.
Yeah.
I have links, but I still think it's just good to
Yeah. If you want to find me, the best place is on YouTube. I'm at Archaeology Tube, so kind of easy to remember probably. And then I'm also on Twitter at Archaeology Game. So that's if you want to follow me there. And then I've got a TikTok and I've got an Instagram and all those things. But those are all mostly to support the YouTube channel. That's really my main place where I'm doing stuff. So check me out there. And I got videos that are about this stuff, and then I've also just got videos that are just like about cool archaeology, and I've got videos that are about archaeology and video games. If you're into that, if you think video games are cool, that was actually originally what the channel was supposed to be for, and I still make some stuff like that. So if you're into nerdy shit, come check me out for that too. I also love that stuff. Yeah, Archaeology Tube, that's me.
All right, well, I thank you, and I appreciate what you do. Go ahead, Cory, real quick, and tell us about where to find your stuff.
Generally these days, the quickest way to find my stuff is on YouTube at The Mind of a Skeptical Leftist, or I've got my Twitch, which is twitch.tv/skeptical leftist. And yeah, I'm at Skeptical Lefty on the Twitters.
Ooh.
Right on. Well, thank you everyone for listening, and I hope that it was worthwhile.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Push the button. There we go.
I don't know if I should just hang out for a minute or...
Hello, and welcome to my channel. I am Damien Marie AtHope. In the simplest terms, I am an atheist-humanist philosopher and prehistorical writer-researcher at DamienMarieAtHope.com. I am specifically an axiological atheist. An axiological atheism can be thought to involve ethical and value theory reasoned and moral argument driven apatheism, agnosticism, atheism, antitheism, antireligionism, secularism, and humanism. Axiological atheists can be understood as a value theory or a value science atheist. As an axiological atheism's ethically reasoned and constructive pro-humanity. I am an axiological thinker, value theorist. The science of goodness, worthiness, usefulness, valuableness, virtue, reliableness, accuracy, validity, morality, integrity, beneficialness, etc., etc. We axiologists have a value consciousness. And in general, we see the architecture of humanistic humanitarianism value in people that we see as dignity beings. Places and things are not. Axiology is a value theory. In its broadest sense, it involves areas of philosophy that are deemed to encompass some evaluative or evaluation aspect. Therefore, it crosses almost all domains in some way or another. Now for a more detailed terms as to what I am. I am an axiological atheist, an anti-theist, an anti-religionist, secularist, humanist, rationalist, writer, artist, poet, philosopher, advocate, activist with schooling in psychology, sociology, as well as I am an autodidact, self-taught in science, archaeology, anthropology, and philosophy. I promote science and am against pseudoscience, pseudohistory, pseudomorality, things that are found in religion.